And Kumi, let's start with you. You've been at this game since the age of 15. You've fought against apartheid. You've fought against violence against women. You've fought for any kind of environmental injustice as well as human rights. Where does it all intersect?
Well, in the past, people used to make this false dichotomy that there was something called human rights that was here, there was something called development or addressing poverty, and then there was something called environment. And the siloed approach just doesn't work. Because, for example, when I was appointed as head of Greenpeace, the first month of interviews that I did with the global media, one of the questions they asked me was, oh, so you've been in human rights and anti-poverty and gender equality activism, now you're abandoning that to go to the environmental side. And my response then, and even more so now, is to assert the struggle to address global poverty, to address human rights, and so on the one hand, and the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change and address environmental justice on the other, must, can, and should be seen as two sides of the same coin. It is the poor that actually always, whether it's in New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, or whether it's in Asia or Africa, it is the poor that actually suffer the most when there's an environmental disaster. And addressing, and it's the poor that stand to benefit most from an energy revolution, from an economy that's driven by dirty brown fossil fuel-based energy to an economy that's driven by clean, green, renewable-based energy. It is the poor that stand to benefit the most because it means jobs, it means less health problems, it means access to electricity, because all these big energy plants, whether it's nuclear, whether it's coal and so on, to a large extent never reaches the people who really need to be reached. And in our country, we have about 10 million people who do not have access to clean, affordable, safe energy.
Important then that Africans Rising, an organization that has recently been launched, and you're one of the launch directors, because it allows you to play in all those spheres and realize the kind of objective that it wants. Tell us about the organization.
Well, we are inspired by the women's movement who gave us this very powerful idea, but a rather cumbersome word. The word is intersectionality, which is you need to understand how, for example, if you're addressing gender, how gender inequality intersects with, age, ability, any other sort of area of human endeavor. Now, with Africans Rising, we look at our continent and we say, we refuse to accept what people outside of the continent sometimes, when they look at us, and like Tony Blair used to irritate me when he used to say, Africa is the scar on the conscience of humanity, as if Africa is a basket case. Let us say Africa is the richest continent on this planet. We are richest underneath the ground. You name it, we have it. Most people around the world wouldn't have cell phones if it wasn't for a rare earth material that comes out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So we want to say Africa is probably one of the poor countries above the ground precisely because we are one of the richest underneath the ground, and that's why we have been exploited left, right, and center by a range of global interests. And we want to change that, and we also recognize that many of our countries on the continent are far too small in terms of population size. And if we are going to, for example, address the energy needs and so on, we need to be thinking about creative things. If you're doing a concentrated solar or wind facility, maybe it can be built on the border of 2 or 3 countries so that we can work. Exactly. So we are committed in Africans Rising of pushing for great political, social, and economic integration. And on a lighter note, we say if Europe can have a euro, we don't see why Africa can't have an afro.
Let's talk about grassroots movements and the role that they can play in realizing a positive outcome and creating progress, particularly in the space of renewable energy in Africa.
I believe that our best hope is investing in people at the grassroots level. We are seeing many communities across the continent where people are fed up of waiting for government to deliver, where people are actually pulling together resources, setting up micro solar grids, looking at other ways of generating energy to meet their needs and so on. But it's important that we recognize that in South Africa, while there's good rhetoric about renewables and so on, there's a big gap between the rhetoric and exactly what is happening. So right now in South Africa, it's grassroots community organized groups who I believe offer us the best chance to defeat our government's plans to build nuclear plants, which are significantly more expensive than solar and wind, and will not reach people in the rural areas. I put my faith, not in my government at the moment, I put it in community groups, people who are living around coal mines and not getting 1 unit of electricity, or people who are living in areas where they've started already uranium mining and so on. Those communities that have seen the health impacts, the social impacts, the environmental impacts are the ones that can speak most eloquently about why we need to invest big time and quickly and ramp up our renewable energy output.
Now, our government has made certain commitments following COP21, including that it will cut emissions by 42% below business as usual by 2025. Are we on track?
Firstly, that commitment was a very important step in the right direction, and we must acknowledge that. Right now, are we on the right track? I would say not as clearly as we need to be. There is still dithering. There is still talking about new coal plants. There's 2 coal plants that Medupi and Kusile, which which was promising jobs and so on. And we know already it is way behind schedule. It's way over budget. And when we look at the renewable energy projects that have been implemented in the last 5 years in South Africa, largely, with few exceptions, they've been on time and in fact, some of them have been ahead of schedule, and none of them have actually overrun budgets. So you must ask the question, who is benefiting from us continuing to talk about nuclear and coal? And as is the case globally, there are certain people in the business community who are making truckloads of money from the current energy system that have huge influence over our political leadership that are holding us. So are we on track? Not 100%. Can we get there by 2020 or by 2025? Absolutely, with the right kind of political will and with government doing something that they must do and force Eskom, because renewables is rising in South Africa, but bear in mind, we started from such a low base. So obviously you're going to see a spike in renewables. But we need to recognize that Eskom is setting ceilings as to how much of renewable energy can come, and we are calling for those ceilings to be removed, and let's people get involved in electricity generation and be part of the solution.
All right, let's focus for a moment, though, on the success stories, because Eskom or not, government or not, there are innovative young South Africans who are investing ridiculous amounts of money in the space of renewable energy. What are some of those success stories that you can reflect on for South Africa?
So, firstly, I think it's a success story that renewable energy projects are showing that they can deliver on budget, on time, and create decent jobs, right? And that is happening on a significant basis across the country at the moment. But, and I can walk you through some of them. So, you know, we're talking in the Northern Cape, the Jasper solar project, where people were taken out of energy poverty for the first time. It was delivered for a fraction of the costs than the kind of money we will waste on a nuclear deal, which will be too expensive, too dangerous, and will deliver too little, too late for people living in rural areas. But more importantly, we're also seeing our universities engaging in more research now on innovation. The vision I have for Africa and for South Africa, but for Africa as a whole, is we don't want to forever be the children of colonialism. We don't want to forever be people who are on the receiving end of patents and technology and imports and so on. We need to be investing in our young people. So, for example, the whole question of battery technology and storage of solar and wind and so on, we should not be holding up our hands and saying, oh, this is a very complicated thing. Because we have the skills in our country and our continent. If we use our resources properly, if we invested in young people, created opportunities for them to be cutting-edge renewable energy technologists and engineers and so on. And that's where our resources should be going now. We need to invest in our young people to make sure that Africa has as good as anywhere else in the world renewable energy technological skills.
I'm going to ask in a moment whether you're hopeful or not, because I'm hearing quite a lot of hope. There's frustration, but there's quite a lot of hope in what you're saying. But you were involved in a company, for example, called Enel, and we're seeing a lot more of these utility companies moving away from fossil fuels and more into renewable energy. Can you talk to that?
Well, Enel is an Italian company, largest energy utility in Italy, second largest in Europe, sixth largest in the world. Their energy historically was nuclear and fossil fuels, coal. And when I started at Greenpeace, they had 10 court cases against us. We had 3 court cases against them, because our activists occupied coal plants and so on. But we continued behind the scenes talking. And in March 2014, the CEO of the company, Francesco Starace, invited us to come to Rome. And we went there and he said, we have decided to do the following things. 1, as of today, we will not invest a cent in nuclear or fossil fuels. 2, we will shut down our existing coal plants and nuclear plants, coal plants by 2030, the nuclear plants by 2050. 3rd, we will not, this is very important, they said we will not go for big power plants. From their experience, they say, what they've learned from making mistakes is the best, even from an economic point of view, is to go for smaller scale, decentralized, smaller plants. And importantly, about the existing facilities, they're not selling it to somebody else. They're taking responsibility for closing them down and making museums or other facilities use of that.
Okay.
Now let me just say that there's a little article that...
20 seconds.
Yeah. People can Google Meet Renewable Energy's Odd Couple. It was an article on Bloomberg which tells the story of how we found each other and now how, in fact, this company is a challenge to other renewable energy companies to do the same thing.
Stunning. One-word answer, yes or no. Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful because we do not have a choice but to be hopeful.
Dr. Kumi Naidoo, thank you very much for joining us. Jonathan, there is some frustration, but certainly a lot of hope in terms of what we're doing in South Africa.